You want to read it out?
Sure. It says, I've been struggling with pornography. Do you have any advice?
Man, that's a heavy topic. I think obviously people within the church community would pretty universally say that they feel like pornography is wrong, that it's bad for you. It's interesting because even outside of that, in the scientific community, all of the findings that they've found recently about the ways that it rewires your brain and the pleasure centers in your brain and the ways that it can be harmful to you, I think we can say pretty universally, this is something that can truly become a full-blown addiction for a person, and anything that can be addictive shouldn't be played with, right? Mm-hmm. Like you have to take it seriously. And I think that for this in particular, the ways that it can affect you and the ways it can affect your relationships can have devastating consequences. Mm-hmm. So we don't have to sit here and debate, like, do you think it's bad or not? I think it's not good for you. Mm-hmm. So knowing that, I think one of the things that tends to make it worse for people is this guy clearly doesn't want to be, he says, I've been struggling with it. So he doesn't want to be watching it. He doesn't want it to be part of his life. So I don't think it's a far stretch to say he's probably also dealing with some shame around it if he wants to be free of this. And I have seen so many times how that becomes almost like a cycle. And I've heard you talk on this before in a really eloquent way. And so I would love to hear you kind of unpack how that can become like a self-fulfilling prophecy and really like a self-feeding, cycle, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great question. I appreciate the spirit behind it. Like you said, this is somebody who recognizes this is not taking them where they want to go, and they're trying to figure out how to get some help and what to do about it. I think I got a lot of thoughts on it. One, I think the reality is a lot of people are engaging with pornography. I remember during COVID seeing like some statistics, especially during that time, where you had people who were extremely overwhelmed,
stressed, isolated.
Absolutely, like some of them very lonely, and so there was a huge rise during that time. But it was already massive. I remember seeing like stats about, people spend more money on pornography than like how much we spend on national security, and then some. Like it's like a lot.
It's whole country's GDPs.
Yeah, so I think like there are some people that would see it as harmless, that it's like it's a victimless, crime essentially, right? Like I'm doing something that's not hurting anyone. But I think that's not true. I think when you look at even like what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount when he's talking about lust, and he's saying, look, it's not just so much whether you go and commit adultery or you do the deed, but if you're doing this and you're running this rep in your mind, it's negatively affecting you. It's building a groove in your brain, and ultimately what you're doing is you're debasing another person. That's what lust ultimately is, looking at someone just for their parts essentially, and not looking at their soul, not looking at who they are. So it's taking the humanity away from someone and being a taker, taking away from them for yourself. And so sex at its best brings intimacy, it brings unity. We're two people giving to one another, and so this now again becomes something where you start to get comfortable debasing. And this is why you'd see often people that end up maybe doing things outside of sex all the way, or pornography, all the way even to like murder, right, to take someone's life. A lot of times you'll see, man, they had an issue with pornography. Not that every person that looks at pornography is gonna
no, you're not drawing an equal line.
No, but I'm just saying, like, you start to get in the habit of taking away someone's humanity and debasing them in your mind. Now that can be a slippery slope into a lot of things. So whoever sent this in, I think has acknowledged that, is like, look, I don't want to do that. And like you said, even psychologists and counselors have seen young men struggling with impotence and depression, and again, it's not just men, women that are struggling with impotence and depression, and struggling to actually bond and have an emotionally intimate relationship, because this has been something that went from a temptation to an addiction. Mm-hmm. And anything that's addicting, you got to be really careful with. You just don't you don't mess with it. You don't act. Not even that. Again, we're not saying you have to be sexually like have no sex, right? Or
Right.
we're not saying that. Again, anything that's potentially addicting doesn't mean
That
abstinence.
it's inherently bad.
Yeah, like
But you mess.
but
Yeah.
you got to be really careful, really, really careful with these things. Otherwise, they can take your freedom away from you. So it seems like this guy has acknowledged that. I would say, man, the first thing you want to do is really bringing this to the Lord and finding grace, like really starting from a place of grace. Because I think if you allow shame to overtake you, it ends up creating more pressure that then you feel like you need relief from, which will make pornography that much more appealing.
Correct.
And that much more of a temptation because, again, an orgasm creates this really acute release of brain chemicals, right? So what brain chemicals, like during sex, right, are released? It's the brain chemicals that bond you to another person, the brain chemicals that give you, adrenaline, ultimately give you passion and excitement, and then the brain chemicals that give you peace, help you to relax. Okay, so often somebody who is wanting that sort of experience, in some way they have pressure they're trying to release, they have peace, they're trying to find some peace, or trying to find some joy,
relief.
stress relief, or even fulfillment and passion, and so they're trying to find something to get excited about. And so it's kind of this cheap way of doing it. And unfortunately, if you're not wise to that, you can end up being extremely counterproductive. You blow out this appetite, and now, the things that used to get you excited or give you peace don't do it anymore. And so it just gets deeper and darker.
Yeah.
And that's where it's like, oh man, you wake up in a nightmare. So, I think you start with this, man, whoever this person is, and I don't know if it's a male or female, but whoever this is, I think you want to start with the fact that probably the thing that you're trying to get from pornography, if you track it backwards, it might not be bad. Like, you might be looking for peace. You might be looking for fulfillment. You might be looking for connection. You might be looking for significance. Okay? I want to feel strong. I want to feel important. I want to feel wanted. I want to feel powerful. Okay, these aren't necessarily bad things. Like, it's not bad to want to feel fulfilled. It's not bad to want to feel peace or even to feel pleasure.
I was going to say, it's not even bad to want to feel pleasure or feel
No.
excitement. People, I
Exactly.
think, especially within the church community, tend to demonize that, and that's not a bad thing.
When I've had people who I've sat with who bring me their real stories, okay, and they're going, man, I got into a bad spot. Man, I am stuck in this addiction. If I start tracking back to the origin, it's almost always there was a reasonable appetite that they had. There was a reasonable desire. It wasn't a perverted desire. It wasn't an evil desire. It was a normal human desire that they had, that then they went for the cheap version. They essentially went, I can get this. This is immediate gratification. This
Quick fix.
gives me a quick fix and an intense fix. And so they went for that, not really maybe understanding or thinking out, or they're taking a risk that they shouldn't have taken that led them to a place where now they're like, I am out of control. But where you got to kind of walk it back and go, look, like, you can, when you get to that place where it starts to get really deep and dark, you see who you're becoming, and often you start wallowing in shame because you're like, I'm disgusting. You feel like God thinks you're disgusting. You see yourself as disgusting. Maybe you got caught. Maybe your wife caught you, your husband caught you or something, and now they're upset with you, or you broke their heart. And so, or maybe even they went after you. You hurt them and they hurt you, and they're telling you how disgusting you are. So my point is, it can then start with that shame that then builds up the pressure that then now the temptation is even greater. So to start with, like, look, it was probably a reasonable appetite, a reasonable desire that caused this thing to be a temptation
Yeah,
for you.
you're not inherently disgusting. I
Exactly.
think that's what people need to hear. Like,
Yeah.
please be released from that.
It's a good starting point, right? And it doesn't mean you just snap your fingers and it's all good. You probably still need to get help. You're probably still going to need to put up tremendous boundaries. What I appreciate about this person is they're not in denial, because I think a lot of people would be in denial. Hey, it's not that big a deal. It's not that big a deal. And yet, yeah, no, this person's like, it is a big deal. And so I'm going to need to get help. And so I think I see it more and more normal that people are starting to go, hey, I'm struggling with this. I need help. And I think it used to be this thing that was so embarrassing. And I'm not saying people aren't still embarrassed, but I think, you look at, if the math is true around the bazillions of dollars that's going into this and how much traffic is going this way, we know that a lot of people are struggling with it. And it takes a lot of courage to come and ask for help. So I think like there's a lot of hope, but I think it starts with not giving into the shame of going, I'm disgusting because I did this. Well, there were reasonable things. It's okay to want peace. It's okay to want fulfillment. It's okay to want significance. It's okay to want connection. And it's okay to want passion.
Yeah.
And those things aren't bad. Now, you made some bad choices. You did some things and you went down a road that ultimately, you thought was going to bring you those things, but brought you bondage. Okay, that's where we are right now. Now let's take our reality and let's start working our way out. So you might need to get support, put up boundaries, make some serious changes. And what's amazing, and this is the last thing I'll say about it, because I think I'm probably in overtime at this point. What is amazing is scientifically, fact check me on this, study on this, it is all reversible in terms of even the damages done to your brain. I've seen several studies where they talk about somebody who maybe has been in the bondage of pornography. Once they get out and detox and they step away, their brain starts to rewire itself, starts to restore and rejuvenate itself.
Your chemical balances come back.
Stuff comes back.
Yeah.
And so it's not hopeless. Like you may have had a lot of starts and stops and failed attempts to get yourself out of the quicksand, but it is not hopeless if you take the steps.
And I'm sure we are probably at time. Is that right? I'm going to just do a quick little bonus round on that, because I think there's something else really important that we can miss. Excuse me. And that is when you mentioned, you probably will need to get help. You will probably need to, you may need to go to therapy and work through some things. Can I just say how important that is, period, and something that I see within the church that is potentially even a bigger problem is the way that the church culture has actually kind of, for lack of a better word, pornified marriage. They have told guys, hey, just keep it in your pants, keep it, don't look at things or whatever until you get married, and then it's just whatever. Then you can just go whatever your wildest things are. Now listen, I'm not saying when you're married everything has to be vanilla. It can be whatever you want it to be. But my point is, it's whatever the two of you want it to be. And I think that...
Yeah, marriage is not a license to debase your wife.
And that's my point. When I talk about pornifying marriage, I talk about we have still taught the mindset around porn. But we've just put boundaries on it. That's not healthy either. Your wife is not just your release,
right?
And now she's your quick fix. Instead of looking at someone on a screen, you're debasing and dehumanizing her instead of looking for genuine connection there. And I'm not saying every interaction you have to have, you have is like this deep, just look in each other's eyes. Everything's so, sacred and whatever. It's like, no, fun is intended.
Yeah.
Excitement is intended. Like, it's cool for it to be like that. But it has to be things you both enjoy. And it's not just, well, this is what I want, and I'm going to treat you like crap if you're not giving me what I want when I want. Because again, now you're back to, you're just looking for a quick fix and you're not addressing the real problem. If you're finding yourself in a place where, you need this like constant sexual interaction without any kind of an emotional interaction with your spouse, and you're just using that to like get your stress relief and move on, and where have you left them? Where are they emotionally after the interaction? If they're not in a better place as well, okay, there's probably something deeper that you still should be going and addressing. So that's my little bonus take on that.
Yeah,
I would encourage people to look at that.
I think it's an important conversation. So
It is.
I don't mind going a little bit over time.
Yeah.
I think like when you look at what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, what we call the Torah sampler, he takes a few different things from the Torah and takes them deeper. But
Correct.
what he's doing is he's not singling out 4 things. He's teaching us how to think about everything.
Correct.
And so, but one of the things he does is he talks about adultery, and then he talks about lust. So he's like, it's not, again, I mentioned it earlier, it's not just that you do the deed or don't do the deed. It's what's happening in your heart.
Yeah.
So if you follow that train of logic and what Jesus is saying there, he's going, what's happening at your heart level is extremely important. Even if your body is obeying the law, if your heart is not,
Yes.
or your mind is not, then you're committing a sin.
Yes,
essentially.
that's the core of
So
it.
that means if you think about that, if in a marriage, somebody is debasing the other person just because we went to and legally are married and we both have rings now. Okay. Of course, like within a marriage, you guys can do whatever you want to do, in your bedroom, right? We're not here to,
That's your business.
throw a flag, but at the heart level, it is totally possible for someone to debase even someone
And
they've committed
use,
to
yes.
and who is committed to them, and to use them in a way where they're taking away their humanity.
That's right.
Okay. And again, we're not trying to get legalistic and say, like you said, every sexual encounter has, even in your marriage, has to, be this deep soul tie, like you said. But at the end of the day, like if that's what you're doing, you could actually be sinning against your own spouse.
That's right.
So it really is to pay close attention to the heart level, not in a legalistic way, not in a shame way, in a wisdom way.
That's right.
I want to look and go, what is happening to my heart? How am I looking at my wife? Am I just angry because she's not feeding me what I want, feeding my need, right? She might be feeding you. You might be trying to get her to feed your lust.
That's right.
Right? And that's actually corrupting your heart. At some point, if that's what is causing you guys to be irritated with one another, and that's what you're angry about, that is causing you to taste the contents of your own heart.
Yeah.
Take that as a caution. Step back, right? Repent of that. Have a deeper thought, a deeper prayer, and a deeper conversation that ultimately, right, can save you from cascading.
Yes. So good. All right. We can move on. Thanks for
Can
giving
I
us.
ask a quick question about it?
Yeah.
Sure.
So if someone is struggling with it, your advice is talk to your wife or husband, or talk to a friend first and then go to them? Like what would be like the quick action step for someone? Let's assume they're married.
Who's bound in pornography?
Right.
Yeah, I would say, well,
I wouldn't advise go talk to a friend unless your friend is in any way an expert in that space. I would say talk to someone who's an expert in that, a therapist, or, there are a lot of like recovery groups for those kinds of things. Like I would find someone that's actually, is skilled in that space.
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. Like, so some people, it's like, hey, my spouse and I just got in a big fight because I was caught. They caught me or whatever. So some of them, their spouse knows, some of them, their spouse may not know. So I think there's a lot to that in terms of how you have those conversations and how you reestablish trust and how you get help. But I think the key is get help. I mean, like we have a group called 180, which is really targeted at guys who are trying to find freedom from sexual sin. And so there's community around it. They have like certain resources where it's like literally an on-call person. So if you're about to do something that you don't want to do, but you're feeling really weak, you can dial them up right now.
Yeah.
So there's like 180 groups, I believe, all over the country. I know they're in this
So
area.
many resources.
Yeah, but there are a lot of resources. I would say you know, whether it's going to a licensed therapist or getting into a group or getting in somewhere where you're going to have accountability is very key. Like if you don't set up boundaries and have accountability, then a lot of times that's the denial people live in, is like, oh no, I can do it. Whatever it is, right? Whether it's a substance or anything you're bound in, they just go, oh no, I'm good. And that's why in the 12-step programs, like step 1 is like, dude, I got a problem. Like you have to admit it. You have to start by admitting it. And then you got to set up a lot of boundaries. So, I mean, I think 12-step programs, are great. Celebrate recovery. A lot of these 12-step programs are extremely effective. Yeah. But you got to take it that seriously.
That's right.
So I would say go to a pro. I mean, because again, you go to the wrong friend, they're like, dude, what's the big deal, bro? Yeah. Doesn't really matter.
If she wasn't being so difficult, you wouldn't have. Yeah.
You're a guy, dude. Every guy does it. Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks a lot, bro.
not the right friend.
Yeah, wrong.
So yeah, unless that friend is someone who's an expert in that space in some way, I wouldn't just say go to a friend. I would say, and also the nice thing about a lot of those groups, it's beyond accountability, because I think some people hear accountability and they do feel shame still. They feel like I need somebody like watching over my shoulder. That's not what you're saying. You mean it really in the sense of support. If I'm in my moment where I'm feeling weak, I have someone to call.
That's right.
Because again, the leading with grace piece, I think, is so important that you brought up. Like, that's going to help you not create this pressure cooker of like, oh no, I'm going to fall and mess up, and then everybody's going to be so mad. You know, it's like you got to get
support, and you have to think of it as managing an appetite.
Correct.
You're managing an appetite. Like
the
I
appetite's
dude,
not
I've had
gonna
men,
go away.
I've had men come to me. They're like, Pastor, I'm just really angry with God because I've been praying about this and I'm still tempted. And I'm like, my man, your sexual appetite is a gift from God.
It's normal. It's so normal. It's part of who you are as a human being.
Handled correctly, it's amazing intimacy.
Yeah, we're not
and
asking
connection
you to
and
take
acceptance.
appetites away.
So we're not praying that God would deliver us from our sexual appetite. Some of it's going to be bringing discipline around this appetite so that it can be all that it's supposed to be.
Right.
So I think you got to frame it that way and go, so how do I, if I'm way out of bounds at this point, how do I bring this thing back into its boundary?
Yeah,
We'll attach some of those resources in the show notes if anyone's interested.
that's great.
Great.